She was lying in a hospital bed, unconscious, while her husband and his mistress were plotting her funeral. They thought she would never wake up. They thought they had won, but someone was listening, and she could hear everything. When her eyes opened, it wasn't weakness staring back, it was fire, and the world she knew was about to crumble. Hey there, where are you listening from today? Let us know in the comments. Make sure you watch till the very end, because you won't want to miss a single twist of this incredible story. And if you enjoy what you hear, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating tales. Now, let's dive in. The hospital room was thick with a silence that felt almost cruel, broken only by the slow, steady beeping of the heart monitor beside Nia's fragile form. Her stunning brown skin, once glowing with life, now looked washed out beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. But even in unconsciousness there was something fiercely beautiful about her, a quiet, unbroken strength lying beneath the surface. Her breaths were shallow, each one sounding like a fragile thread holding her to the world, but there was still a powerful spirit inside her, refusing to let go. The thin blanket covering her trembled faintly with the rise and fall of her weakened chest, and although her eyes remained closed, her mind hovered somewhere between darkness and awareness, drifting in and out of distant memories and muffled sounds. The room felt painfully still, but the air around her was thick with secrets, dark, deadly secrets she didn't yet have the strength to confront. Just a few feet away, behind the half-pulled blue curtain, two shadows shifted with a kind of cold excitement that didn't belong anywhere near a dying woman's bedside. Caleb, the man who once held her hands and promised her forever, stood there with a confidence that didn't match the gravity of the situation. He didn't look like a worried husband. He looked like a man waiting for a business deal to close. His eyes scanned the machines not with fear but calculation, as if he were merely checking the timing of his profit. Victoria, his mistress, stood beside him, her icy face completely free of guilt, her lips shaped in a twisted smirk. As she clung to Caleb's arm like she already belonged in Nia's place, she lifted her chin slightly, watching Nia from the corner of her eye, as though observing the downfall of a rival, not the suffering of a woman whose life they were plotting to erase. The curtain was meant to give privacy, but it only gave cover for their wicked intentions. Their voices were low, but their words were soaked in poison. Caleb leaned closer to Victoria, and a cruel satisfaction gleamed in his expression as he whispered, "Once she's gone, everything becomes easy." His tone carried zero grief, zero hesitation, only hunger. He talked about selling Nia's house like it was a used piece of furniture he'd grown tired of, mentioning how her mother's land could be put on the market quickly if they moved fast enough. Victoria giggled softly, her painted nails touching her lips as she imagined decorating Nia's home with her own expensive taste, replacing Nia's memories, erasing her existence piece by piece. There was no pity in her voice when she said, "I can't wait to move in. It'll feel so good knowing she's not coming back to claim anything." Her words sliced through the air sharply. The kind of woman who could laugh at another woman's death didn't deserve forgiveness, and yet she stood only feet away from the unconscious body of the woman she hoped would die before sunrise. Each whisper felt like another dagger aimed at Nia's heart, but fate had placed someone else within earshot, someone who wasn't supposed to hear, but did. Jade, the young nurse assigned to the night shift, had come only to check Nia's IV line. Nothing more. Nothing dramatic. She was new, gentle, soft-spoken, but what she heard behind that curtain froze her blood in her veins. Her eyes widened with horror when Caleb said, "Good thing she won't wake up. She's useless to me now." The words felt unreal. No husband should speak like that. Jade felt her throat tighten as she remembered how carefully she had been tending to Nia all night, believing she was helping a man desperate to save his wife. But now she realized she was standing near a wolf dressed as a grieving spouse. Victoria's voice followed, colder than winter glass. "The doctor said her chances are low. Let's hope she doesn't wake at all." Jade's heart clenched violently. She wanted to shout at them, wanted to rip the curtain open and expose them, wanted to drag them out of that room with her bare hands. But one wrong move could cost her job. Her credentials, her future hospitals were political places, and Caleb had the kind of arrogance that came from knowing people in high places. So Jade stayed silent, forcing her breath to remain steady, even though her chest trembled with rage. Instead of confronting them, Jade stepped closer to Naya, her patient, her responsibility, the woman lying helpless, while the two people who should have protected her wished for her death. Jade leaned down, as if adjusting the wires, but her voice lowered to a whisper near Nia's ear. "If you can hear me, stay strong," she murmured, her words sincere, filled with hope she prayed wasn't foolish. "They don't deserve your silence. They don't deserve your pain. Fight." She spoke softly, believing desperately that sometimes the unconscious mind could listen, even when the body couldn't respond. As she whispered, she noticed something shift. A small twitch, a flicker beneath the eyelid, a flutter in the fingers. Nia wasn't as far gone as everyone assumed. Something deep within her stirred. Like a flame catching the first breath of oxygen, Jade's eyes widened as the heart monitor's steady beep began to pick up speed, subtle at first, then sharper, faster, undeniable. Nia's heart was responding to something, someone, perhaps a truth she recognized even in darkness behind the curtain. Caleb laughed again, an ugly, careless sound at the worst possible moment. His laughter collided with the rising beeps of the machine, and suddenly the monitor erupted with an alarm, its loud, frantic tone slicing through the room like a siren of warning. Caleb's smirk disappeared instantly, his eyes snapping toward the sound with startled fear. Jade stepped back in shock as Naya's fingers twitched again, stronger this time, almost deliberate. Victoria stiffened, her icy expression cracking with a hint of disbelief. The room seemed to freeze in collective suspense, the air turning electric. The monitor screeched louder, filling the room with panic, and in that charged, breathless moment, something extraordinary happened. Nia's eyelids fluttered open, slowly, weakly, but unmistakably alive. Her lashes trembled like the wings of a battle-scarred butterfly forcing itself awake after a storm. Jade placed a hand over her mouth, fighting the urge to gasp. Caleb took a stumbling step backward, as if he had just seen a ghost rise from the dead Victoria's face, lost all color as she clutched Caleb's arm with shaking fingers. And then Nia's eyes fully opened, revealing not the dull emptiness of someone clinging to life, but the blazing fire of a woman who had heard every word and would never be the same again. Her gaze was weak yet fierce, soft yet sharp, a storm hidden behind exhaustion. She wasn't supposed to hear anything. She wasn't supposed to wake up. She wasn't supposed to rise. But she did, and her eyes held war. Her lips parted, just slightly, hinting that her first words wouldn't be of gratitude, but of revelation. The room remained painfully still as Naya's eyes stayed open, their fire dimmed only by the exhaustion weighing on her body, but the strength inside them was unmistakable. Jade, who had been frozen with shock only moments ago, instantly snapped into motion, her hands quickly adjusting the monitor wires to stop the alarm from drawing unnecessary attention. She leaned in close, pretending to check the IV line, but her lips barely moved as she whispered urgently into Nia's ear, "Don't react yet. They planned your funeral. Just breathe. Just watch." The words were soft, but they struck Nia's heart with the force of lightning. She blinked slowly, not out of weakness, but out of fury she was trying desperately to control. Every moment from the last 3 years flashed before her, the nights Caleb held her, the promises he made, the way she once believed she had found a soulmate. All of it felt like shattered glass now, glittering with betrayal, cutting deeper with each memory. Across the room, Caleb spun toward her, his fake panic dripping off him like cheap perfume as he rushed to her bedside as though he had always been a devoted husband. "Nia, baby!" he cried, overacting the role of the caring spouse he had abandoned long ago. He grabbed her hand too tightly, squeezing it as though the gesture could erase the venom he had spewed behind the curtain just minutes ago. His face twisted into a mask of forced relief, eyes watering as if her waking up was the miracle he had prayed for. But under that mask, Nia could see it clearly now, was fear. Not fear for her life, but fear for what she might say. Nia kept her body limp on purpose, letting her hand rest cold and still in his palm, pretending to be disoriented. Inside, she was awake, wide awake, analyzing him with the sharpness of a lioness preparing to strike at the exact moment her prey felt safe. Victoria stood a few steps behind Caleb, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression impossible to hide. Irritation, disgust, inconvenience. The woman's eyes narrowed with open annoyance at the sheer audacity Nia had shown by surviving. Victoria's jaw clenched each time she looked at Nia's face, silently screaming that she wished the beeping of the machine had flattened instead of rising. She shifted her weight impatiently, as though Nia waking up was a delay in her schedule, a complication in a plan she thought was already sealed. The icy gleam in her eyes made something in Nia's chest harden. Not pain, not heartbreak, but clarity. Glacial, lethal clarity. Jade leaned slightly closer again, pretending to check the connecting tubes near Nia's wrist. "You're safe with me," she murmured so quietly that anyone more than an inch away would have missed it. "Just watch how they lie." Nia didn't move, not even her eyelashes, but inside her chest, the flame burned hotter. Her breathing steadied into a slow rhythm, controlled, deliberate. She wasn't afraid now. She wasn't confused. She wasn't broken. She was collecting every detail, every twitch, every whisper, every false tear. This time she was listening with purpose. Caleb squeezed her hand harder, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, his voice thick with fake affection. "Baby, you're back." "I thought I lost you," he said with an exaggerated tremble that would have fooled a stranger, but not a woman who had heard him discuss selling her mother's land like a cheap car. While the hand holding hers trembled with forced emotion, his other hand, carefully hidden behind his thigh, was already moving. Nia's eyes, though half-lidded, caught the faintest glow from his screen. His thumb typed quickly, tapping out a message to Victoria, even while he pretended to be drunk with relief. She didn't blink. She didn't look. She didn't shift. But she saw it all, his fingers tapping secrets, Victoria glancing at her phone, the brief smirk they exchanged like two criminals communicating in code. It was like watching two snakes coil together in a pit they thought she couldn't see. Jade noticed it too, her jaw tightening slightly as she pretended to jot notes on her tablet. The tension inside the room thickened like fog, turning every breath heavy and dangerous. Nia let her gaze lock onto Caleb's face, and something inside her shifted. Something cold, something powerful, something unbreakable. Caleb leaned closer, expecting gratitude, tears, perhaps a weak smile of relief. But when their eyes met, he froze. There was no softness in her gaze now, no confusion, no fear. Her eyes held a calm that was more terrifying than any anger could be. A calm that said she knew. A calm that said she had awakened not as a victim, but as someone who had seen the truth. Caleb's breath caught for a moment, his smile faltering as he studied the strange, unreadable strength glinting in her dark eyes. It unnerved him, unsettled him, made him swallow hard despite the lovingly crafted lie he was playing. Victoria caught the exchange and stepped forward slightly, as if trying to break the connection forming in Nia's stare. But the moment she moved, Nia's attention snapped toward her, not with fear, but with a quiet, slicing awareness that made Victoria's confidence wobble. For the first time since Nia woke up, Victoria took a small step back, almost imperceptibly, but enough to show that something about Nia's eyes unsettled her too. Something new, something fierce, something unpredictable. The monitors beeped steadily, but the tension in the room beat louder than any machine. Nia's lips parted slightly, her throat working as she tried to find her voice. Caleb immediately leaned closer, thinking she would whisper his name. He prepared his expression, softening his eyes, lowering his voice, ready to receive a tender, fragile Caleb that he could twist around his finger and use to keep control. He inhaled deeply, bracing for validation. But the moment Nia's voice finally slipped out, weak, almost airy, but sharp with purpose. It wasn't his name that came from her trembling lips. Caleb's expression shattered as the first word she whispered was someone else's. The air in the room froze the moment Nia's trembling lips shaped the single name that didn't belong to her husband. The sound was fragile, barely a breath, but it landed with the weight of a hammer between every person in the room. "Jade," she whispered, her voice cracked yet strong enough to shift the entire atmosphere. Caleb stiffened instantly, the blood draining from his face, as if those 4 letters had sliced straight through his carefully constructed facade of loving concern. His fingers loosened around her hand, shock widening his eyes, disbelief twisting his expression into something ugly and exposed. For a man who expected his name to be the first she uttered, as if her world revolved around him, he could not hide the punch of rejection that shattered his ego in an instant. Jade, standing at Nia's bedside with trembling hands and furious eyes, stepped forward instinctively, not out of pride, but out of protective instinct. She reached gently for the railing of the bed, leaning closer so Caleb wouldn't see the emotion flickering behind her calm expression. Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm here," she whispered, allowing Nia to anchor herself to the only soul in the room who had shown her humanity. Caleb's jaw tightened in a mixture of jealousy, panic, and rage, a storm gathering under his skin as he tried to understand why his wife, who had once loved him deeply, had chosen the nurse over him. Nia drew a shallow breath, fighting the heaviness in her chest, gathering what little strength her body allowed. She looked at Jade with gratitude, then let her gaze slide back to Caleb. "She saved me," she whispered, each word pulling out like a needle from her throat, sharp with truth. Caleb's face contorted. He flinched as though she had slapped him. His eyes darted from Nia to Jade, then back at Nia, searching desperately for something to blame, someone to accuse, some explanation that didn't expose the monster he had become. The green flicker of jealousy burned through his expression, and for a brief moment he looked like a man terrified of losing control, terrified of losing ownership of something he once believed belonged to him. Behind him, Victoria's composure snapped like thin glass. She rolled her eyes dramatically, muttering under her breath, "Of course the maid wants attention." The bitterness dripping from her voice echoed her frustration, months of scheming, of imagining Nia dying quietly in a hospital bed, now slipping through her fingers like smoke. She crossed her arms tighter and looked away, her irritation surfacing through every inch of her posture. But Nia saw her. Nia saw the flicker of annoyance, the spark of anger, the hint of disappointment that she had dared to survive. And instead of sadness, instead of heartbreak, Nia felt something unexpected. Power. A calm, rising, unshakable power. She watched the two of them, not as the fragile woman who once waited for Caleb's affection, not as the desperate wife who clung to a failing marriage, but as a queen, examining traitors who had been caught in their own betrayal. Her heartbeat slowed into a steady, controlled rhythm, the kind that comes not from fear, but from awakening. Death had tried to claim her betrayal, had tried to bury her, but neither succeeded. And now she was stronger because of it. Jade inhaled deeply, steadying herself as she gently placed a hand on Nia's arm. She knew they needed to remove the poison from the room before it infected Nia's fragile condition again. She signaled the doctor with a subtle nod, using medical authority as a shield to protect Nia. With practiced calm, Jade spoke firmly, yet politely. For privacy and patient stabilization, I need everyone except medical staff to wait outside for a few minutes. Her tone left no room for argument, and luckily the doctor quickly agreed, stepping between them and enforcing Jade's request as medical protocol. Caleb stared at Jade in disbelief, his mouth opening slightly as if he wanted to protest, but the doctor's presence stopped him. He realized he couldn't make a scene without appearing suspicious. Victoria scoffed loudly, annoyed that a nurse, not even a doctor, had dared to push her out of the room. She made a snide remark under her breath, something about poor people overstepping, but Jade paid her no mind. Her only focus was Nia. Caleb lingered for a heartbeat longer, his eyes attempting to meet Nia's gaze again, searching for softness, for some sign that she still loved him, still needed him, still depended on him. But Nia's expression was unreadable, calm, distant, detached. When the door finally clicked shut and their toxic presence disappeared, the silence that followed was heavy, but blessedly clean. Jade exhaled a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping slightly, now that the performance was over. Nia, left with nothing but truth echoing inside her ears, let her body relax into the mattress. Her breaths were deeper now, not because her heart was healed, but because she was done pretending. Her eyes welled with tears, not fragile tears of heartbreak, but silent tears of realization, tears of clarity, tears that acknowledged that the man she loved had not valued her, even in her weakest moment. Jade reached out gently, brushing her thumb across Nia's knuckles. "You don't owe them a single tear," she whispered, with the firmness of a woman protecting another woman's soul. "When you rise, rise big. Rise so high that they can only look up at you." There was a quiet promise in her voice, a vow that Nia was no longer alone in this fight. Her strength gave Nia permission to breathe, and Nia nodded slowly, letting the tears fall freely now. Not because she felt broken, but because she was finally acknowledging the truth she had ignored for too long. Something awakened inside her. A force stronger than fear, stronger than despair, stronger than any love she once felt for Caleb. It was the strength of a woman who had come back from the edge of death with eyes wide open, a woman who understood that survival wasn't enough. She needed to take control of her story again. She didn't say much, didn't need to. Her nod alone carried a silent vow. She would not die for people waiting to inherit her life. But just as Jade squeezed her hand gently, offering comfort, a sudden rustle of footsteps approached the door. A different nurse pushed the curtain aside with urgency written all over her face, her eyes flicking quickly between Jade and Nia. She leaned in closer so no one outside would hear and whispered with alarm, "Nia, your husband is talking to the doctor about life support decisions." The words slammed into the room like thunder. Jade's eyes widened in fury. Nia's breath caught sharply in her throat. Life support decisions. Her husband, who now begged for her recovery, had already tried to sign her fate away. Even now, he wanted control over her life, wanted the option to end it if it benefited him. For a moment, the world tilted. Nia felt a chilling wave rush through her, not of fear, but of revelation. This wasn't just betrayal, it was planned, calculated, merciless, and it was happening now. The strength returning to her was no longer a fragile spark, it was a blazing flame. She inhaled deeply, her jaw tightening as a cold, clear determination washed over her. She was done being the woman on the bed, done being the victim, done being the one they whispered about as if she were already gone. Her voice, though still weak, carried a new steeliness as she said coldly, with unwavering resolve, "I'm leaving this hospital today." Jade froze, because she knew Nia meant every word, and the storm outside that door was only just beginning. 4. The hospital room, once cold and suffocating with whispered betrayal, now felt charged with electricity as Nia's determination solidified into action. Her hand, steady and resolute, gripped the pen as if she were holding the fate of the entire world, and she signed the discharge papers without hesitation. Each stroke of the signature was deliberate, a declaration of autonomy, a refusal to remain confined to a bed where her life had been almost stolen by deceit. The doctors watched, with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some whispered amongst themselves, unsure how a woman so weak from near death could summon such control, while others silently nodded, recognizing the rare, unyielding strength radiating from her presence. Nia's movements were deliberate, precise, almost ceremonial, as if every action itself was a statement of rebirth. The quiet hum of machines filled the background, but their beeping now felt like applause, a rhythm to accompany her ascent from helplessness to power. Jade, ever vigilant, hovered near the edges of the room, her hands busy preparing extra medical notes, prescriptions, and discharge documentation, all carefully printed to create an unassailable shield for Nia. Her eyes constantly flicked toward the door, calculating every step, every possibility. "They want you dead, Nia. Be careful," she whispered, her voice carrying an urgency that didn't need exaggeration. Her warning was quiet, but razor-sharp, slicing through the fragile peace that had settled after Caleb and Victoria were momentarily removed. Nia's lips pressed together, acknowledging the warning, her eyes hardening with a focus that seemed almost unnatural in its intensity. Every word Jade spoke became a lifeline, a map of survival in the chaos that awaited beyond these walls. Nia's pulse steadied, her chest rising with controlled breaths, each inhale drawing in the strength to face not just the hospital, but the treacherous world she had been nearly left behind by. As she rose from the bed, the muscles in her body protesting after weeks of inactivity, her gaze swept the room with deliberate intent. Each object, the monitors, the IV lines, the sterile white sheets, became markers of the past she was leaving behind. Every detail reminded her of the nights she had been betrayed, the whispered plots she had overheard, and the life that had been threatened by those she once trusted most. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though commanding the room itself to recognize her strength. Her feet touched the floor, steady despite the weakness, and every step was measured, each movement a signal that she was no longer the woman lying helpless moments ago. Jade mirrored her silently, close enough to assist, distant enough to give Nia space, both protector and witness to her quiet revolution. The two of them navigated the sterile corridor with a calm that belied the storm, roaring just beyond the hospital doors. Caleb and Victoria returned just as Nia reached the window, their return timed by nothing but their own arrogance and sense of entitlement. They expected the same fragile woman to greet them, to fall into their trap, to respond to their carefully rehearsed lines of concern and affection. But the scene that greeted them was a blow far harsher than any words could deliver. Nia stood fully dressed, hair perfectly arranged despite her recent struggle, and eyes that radiated both clarity and danger. She didn't need to speak. Her posture alone declared that the woman they had plotted against was alive, unbroken, and fully aware of their betrayal. Caleb's voice cracked as he stepped toward her, reaching out instinctively. "Baby, let's go home," the words trembling, revealing panic he could no longer hide. Victoria's eyes narrowed, the smirk she had relied upon faltering as the truth of Nia's awakening slammed into her like ice. Nia's voice finally broke the silence. Cold, measured, sharp. "Home? You mean the place you planned to give her after my funeral?" The words were low but cutting, each syllable a precise blade aimed at their consciences. Caleb froze, beads of sweat forming on his brow, his mouth opening to speak, but no words able to escape. He turned to Jade, his eyes desperately seeking denial, a silent ally to confirm that his cruel plans had remained secret. But Jade remained impassive, silent, her gaze steady as she watched Nia take command of the situation. Victoria's smirk transformed into a thin, brittle line as she realized the truth was out. The secret was exposed, and Nia's survival was now a living, undeniable reality. Nia began to walk forward, each step slow, deliberate, and weighted with authority. Her silence was louder than any scream she could have made. Each movement mocked them, humiliated them, displayed her control in a way that anger alone could never achieve. Caleb instinctively reached out, trying to grab her arm, to stop her, to assert the false power he thought he still possessed. But Nia pulled away easily, her fingers slipping past his grasp as if he were nothing more than air. A shiver ran through him. He had never realized just how strong she had become, how precise, how unyielding. Victoria's face fell further, anger flashing in her eyes, but even her venomous expression could not stop Nia's ascent toward freedom. The hospital security team, summoned discreetly by Jade in anticipation of Caleb's likely reaction, stepped in seamlessly, creating a human wall between Nia and the two manipulators. Their presence gave Nia room to breathe, to move, to claim her space as her own. No one spoke. Words would have only diminished the moment every head turned as she walked past, a quiet, unstoppable force, a woman who had survived death and betrayal and now commanded the room with dignity that made even seasoned staff pause in admiration. Each step took her farther from weakness, farther from manipulation, and closer to the sunlight that beckoned just beyond the sliding doors. Finally, the automatic doors slid open, and Nia felt the warmth of the sun hit her face. The world outside was bright, blinding even, but the light felt like an embrace rather than a threat. She inhaled deeply, tasting the freedom she had long been denied, feeling the wind against her skin as if it were welcoming her back to life. The sterile white walls of the hospital were now behind her, replaced by the sprawling chaos of the city, alive and vibrant, ready to witness her rebirth. She did not need to look back at Caleb and Victoria. Their destruction, their humiliation, their fear of her power was already evident, and that knowledge alone was satisfying enough. She had survived, she had risen, and nothing, not even the men who once betrayed her, could shake the strength now coursing through her veins. And just as the first pulse of relief coursed through her, a black luxury car slowly rolled to a stop in front of her. The vehicle's doors opened with the grace of inevitability, the polished chrome gleaming under the sun. Nia froze for a fraction of a second, sensing the weight of the past colliding with her present. She turned her eyes toward the car, and the figure stepping out brought a chill that mixed with anticipation, a shiver that hinted at both safety and danger, love and reckoning, protection and challenge. The past she thought she had buried so carefully was standing there waiting for her, and the sunlight reflected off the car as if highlighting the next chapter of her life, one she had yet to fully embrace. The man's gaze met hers, unwavering, familiar and powerful, and in that moment Nia realized her story was far from over. Her resurrection had only just begun. 5. The black luxury car gleamed under the late morning sun, its sleek frame reflecting Nia's new reality, one that shimmered with both danger and the promise of protection. As the driver's door clicked open, Nia's gaze instinctively followed the motion, and her breath hitched as the man she thought she'd never see again stepped out. Damon Hale, tall, impeccably dressed, with eyes that had once captured her heart and never let go, moved toward her with urgency written in every line of his face. His presence was commanding, yet there was softness in the panic that crossed his features as he saw the fragility etched into her pale, trembling frame. His deep, steadying voice broke the stunned silence. "Nia, who did this to you?" The words wrapped around her like a lifeline, an anchor in the storm of betrayal that still lingered in her veins. Nia's knees threatened to buckle as her vision wavered, the aftermath of weeks of illness, betrayal and near death making her sway like a reed in a storm. Damon was instantly there, his arms wrapping around her with protective strength that reminded her of a world where she could be safe without question, without the shadow of deceit looming over her. She inhaled sharply, feeling the warmth of his coat envelop her, and for the first time in days, the panic that had been twisting inside her chest began to loosen. This wasn't Caleb. This wasn't Victoria. This was someone who had once cherished her for the soul she had always tried to hide, someone who had never stopped caring, never stopped watching, never stopped remembering Caleb, who had been trailing behind in a frenzy of desperate entitlement, erupted from the sidewalk, shouting with the arrogance of a man who had always believed possession equaled love. "Get away from my wife!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with rage and fear, but Damon did not even glance at him. His full attention remained on Nia, who leaned into him, allowing the strength in his hands to stabilize her faltering body. Damon moved with deliberate care, wrapping his coat around her shoulders as though shielding her from more than just the cold. He was shielding her from the world that had betrayed her, shielding her from men like Caleb, who would try to claim her as property rather than a human being with agency and will. Victoria froze at the threshold, her eyes wide with an unspoken fear. The powerful aura around Damon made her smirk falter, her confidence slipping in the face of a man whose influence was tangible and unyielding. There was no room for her theatrics here, no room for the petty games she had counted on. She realized too late that she had underestimated the silent force that had always lingered on the edges of Nia's life. Damon's presence was more than intimidation. It was a shield, a declaration, a warning that no one would harm Nia while he was near. Nia did not speak. She could not yet. Her lips trembled, but the strength inside her eyes radiated enough for Damon to see every word she couldn't form. The slight quiver of her hands, the shallow breath, the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders, he noticed it all. And in that moment, he vowed silently, a vow as unbreakable as steel. He would protect her with everything he possessed, everything he had earned, and every ounce of his willpower. She was no longer alone, and Caleb's frantic, grasping hand could not reach her. Caleb, sensing the loss of control, reached for Nia in a last-ditch effort to assert dominion over her body, over her life. His fingers brushed her arm as if to claim her, but Damon's gaze, sharp, cold, and unyielding, cut through him like a sword. Caleb froze, caught in the paralyzing intensity of the man's eyes, realizing in that instant that he was powerless. His arrogance, his sense of ownership, all the control he had tried to exert over Nia, crumbled. He stepped back, trembling, cowed, and for the first time, fear replaced anger. Damon's presence left no room for manipulation, no room for lies, no room for the games that Caleb had always counted on to maintain his dominance. Gently, Damon lifted Nia into his arms, her small, fragile body resting against his chest, yet even in her vulnerability, she exuded strength. Each movement was deliberate, careful, a dance of protection and reassurance. He whispered softly into her ear, his voice low and urgent, "Heal first. Revenge later." Those words wrapped around her like armor, a promise that she did not have to face the world alone, and yet it was not a vow to act for her. It was guidance for her, a subtle nudge that the timing of her power, her confrontation, and her reckoning would be hers alone. The crowd of hospital staff and onlookers gave space automatically, sensing the weight of the moment, the silent authority in Damon's movements, the invisible force field he placed between Nia and the chaos Caleb and Victoria tried to bring. With each step toward the car, Nia felt her chest rise with air she had not tasted in weeks, the sunlight glinting off her hair as if celebrating her survival. The world had almost taken her, almost silenced her, and yet here she was, rising with a quiet majesty that even the sun could not outshine. Caleb, left behind on the pavement, dropped to his knees, his voice cracking as he called out her name. Panic and regret fought within him, clashing against a lifetime of arrogance that had never let him admit weakness. "Nia, wait!" he cried. But the words fell into the wind, unheard by the woman whose spirit had risen far above him. The black luxury car began to move, a slow, deliberate glide away from the hospital and away from the grasping hands that had tried to claim her life. Every meter it traveled solidified her independence, her rebirth, her escape from the shadows that had loomed so close. Inside the car, Damon adjusted her position gently, wrapping the warmth of his coat around her shoulders again and securing her small, trembling hand in his palm. The silence between them was comforting, yet charged with meaning. Words were unnecessary when every glance, every touch, every heartbeat conveyed understanding. Naya's eyes slowly met Damon's, the fire of survival reflected in both pairs, a silent recognition of shared history, unspoken promises, and the power of protection that could never be underestimated. The cityscape rolled past the windows as the car moved, but Nia's mind was elsewhere, focused on the life she had narrowly escaped and the people who had betrayed her. The thought of Caleb's greed, his cold calculation, his affair with Victoria burned inside her like molten steel, yet she did not release it now. Damon's words echoed softly in her ears. Heal first, revenge later. That phrase became her mantra, a reminder that strength is not always immediate action, that patience can sharpen power, and that survival is the most profound revenge of all. Finally, the car slowed, easing into the quiet sanctuary of Damon's home. The gates opened like a passage to another world, one that promised safety, influence, and answers she had been denied. Damon carried her across the threshold with unwavering care, his eyes scanning every corner of the entryway for threats, his presence a fortress of calm power. He set her down gently on the sofa, her hand still wrapped in his, her pulse still trembling but steadier now, resonating with the certainty that she was no longer vulnerable. Nia blinked slowly, her vision adjusting to the soft, luxurious interior, and that was when she noticed it. Evidence of a life intertwined with hers, evidence that told her Damon had never forgotten, had never stopped thinking, had never ceased fighting for her, even in the shadows when she had been unaware. Her eyes widened in shock as her gaze landed on the photographs, documents, and small tokens meticulously placed around the room. Each one a reminder of the man's unwavering devotion, each one a thread connecting the past with the present, revealing secrets she could scarcely have imagined. For the first time since waking in that hospital bed, Nia realized that her survival was only the beginning, and that the man who had watched her all along had prepared for this moment far longer than she had ever known. The air inside Damon's penthouse felt different from the moment Nia stepped across the threshold. Lighter yet charged, safe yet electric, suffused with the unspoken presence of someone who had never stopped watching, waiting, protecting. She sat up slowly on the velvet sofa, her body aching from weakness, yet her mind sharp, as if every nerve had been electrified by survival. Her breath caught when her eyes fell upon the meticulously arranged frames, articles, sketches, and photographs scattered across the walls and shelves, each one a testament to a life entwined with hers, meticulously documented, preserved, and remembered. There she was, captured in moments of laughter, moments of contemplation, moments she had believed were private, secret, now immortalized under the vigilant gaze of the man who had never let her memory fade. Damon stepped quietly into the room, his presence solid and grounding, yet not imposing, every movement precise, deliberate, emanating a quiet strength. His voice broke the silence, low but powerful, carrying a weight that resonated through the room and into Nia's chest. "I never stopped caring, even after you married him." The confession hung between them, raw, unflinching, stripped of any pretense. Instead of feeling trapped or suffocated by the intensity of his feelings, Nia felt an unexpected sense of empowerment. This was a man who saw her for her essence, not her status, not her appearance, not the manipulated identity Caleb had tried to craft for her. For the first time since waking in that hospital bed, she realized she was valued, truly valued, for the person she was beneath the surface. Damon approached her slowly, keeping his distance, yet the intensity of his gaze was inescapable. "I tried to warn you before your wedding," he admitted, his voice soft but steady. "But Caleb, he threatened me. He knew I could interfere, and he made sure I wouldn't." Nia's jaw clenched. The memory of that fateful business trip Caleb had orchestrated to separate her from warnings, to silence her true allies, now crystal clear in her mind. Every whispered lie, every carefully timed absence, every manipulation fell into place like pieces of a dark puzzle she had been blind to before her heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but from a growing fire of clarity, understanding, and righteous anger. Damon continued, his tone almost reverent yet firm. "I can offer you safety, a place to regroup, legal support to reclaim what's yours. But know this. I don't want your love, Nia. Only your freedom. Only your life back." The words struck her like a thunderclap, more empowering than any plea for affection could have been. For the first time in years, she felt respected, not owned, not possessed, not coerced into someone else's narrative. The air around them shifted, a tangible energy of alliance forming between them, silent but undeniable. Nia allowed herself a moment to breathe, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly as the reality of her newfound refuge settled in her bones. As she processed the enormity of the situation, a distant vibration interrupted the fragile calm. A phone. The screen lit up with Caleb's name, flashing relentlessly, as if the device itself were panicked. Nia's hand hovered over it, hesitation flickering across her expression. Her thumb pressed the screen, and she turned toward Damon, her voice cold and deliberate. "Answer it," he obeyed, placing the call on speaker without a word, and the room filled with the frantic, desperate sound of Caleb's voice, cracking with fear and urgency. "Nia, please, come home. I made a mistake. I didn't know. I didn't understand." Nia's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible scoff, her eyes narrowing as she listened. Every word, every tremor in his tone only reinforced the reality she had already embraced. She was no longer vulnerable to his whims, no longer shackled by the fear or love he had exploited for his gain. And yet, before she could respond, the conversation took an abrupt, electrifying turn. Caleb's voice wavered, panic overtaking desperation, and then he screamed, a sound so raw it seemed to pierce through the walls, through the penthouse, and through the protective bubble Damon had created around her. "Victoria! She's missing! Someone took her!" The words hit Nia like a sudden storm. Her pulse spiked, a sharp jolt of adrenaline igniting every nerve ending. She froze, her mind racing as the magnitude of the revelation settled in. Caleb's carefully orchestrated plans, his manipulations, his betrayals were unraveling faster than she could have imagined. And yet, she felt no fear, only a calm, potent realization. The universe was aligning, karma was beginning to balance the scales, and she was now standing at the epicenter of the fallout. Damon's eyes met hers, steady, alert, protective, and she saw that he too understood the implications of Caleb's revelation. Even as he masked his concern behind a controlled facade, Nia rose slowly from the sofa, her body still trembling with the aftermath of weeks of weakness. But her movements were deliberate, purposeful, filled with quiet authority. She walked across the penthouse, her gaze lingering on each photo, each sketch, each article of her life carefully documented by Damon. It was both a reminder of the past and a map for the present, a chronicle of who she was, who she had survived, and who she was now becoming. Every frame, every token carried weight, telling her that her existence had meaning beyond manipulation, betrayal, or the petty ambitions of a man like Caleb Damon, followed at a respectful distance, his presence unwavering, yet Nia sensed his vigilance in every step, in every subtle shift of his posture, in every quiet breath he took. The penthouse itself felt alive, charged with anticipation, as if the walls themselves recognized the magnitude of what was unfolding. Naya's mind raced, considering her next moves, calculating the distance between safety and action, between caution and the reclamation of her power. Each breath she took seemed to draw clarity, each heartbeat resonated with purpose. The phone continued to vibrate relentlessly, Caleb's panic spilling into the room, each word a testament to the unraveling of his control. Nia did not flinch. She did not panic. She allowed the sound to fill the space, letting it underscore the shift in power. Her lips pressed together as she considered the magnitude of what she had just learned. Victoria's disappearance was no small thing, and the chaos it signaled was palpable. Yet Nia felt a thrill of control. She had survived betrayal, manipulation, and near death. She had risen. She was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. She was the player now. Her hand brushed over a sketch of herself, drawn months ago by Damon during the time he had silently observed her life from afar. The detail captured her resilience, her spirit, her essence, the very traits Caleb had tried to ignore, suppress, or destroy. And in that moment, Naya understood the depth of what Damon had done. He had preserved her identity, celebrated her essence, and waited for the exact moment she would need it most. Her eyes hardened with resolve. She would not be passive. She would not be afraid. She would rise with dignity, power, and calculated purpose, and the consequences for those who had wronged her would unfold in time, deliberate and undeniable. The penthouse was silent except for Caleb's frantic voice echoing from the speaker, but Nia's eyes met Damon's, steady, sharp, unyielding, as if silently declaring, the game had changed, and the woman they had underestimated was now fully awake, fully aware, and ready to reclaim her life, piece by piece. The penthouse settled into a tense quiet after Nia's last words, the muted echo of Caleb's frantic voice still lingering through the speakerphone, a testament to the unraveling chaos that now defined his world. Damon's hand hovered over the device before he pressed the mute button, cutting off the desperate wails that filled the room. He turned to Nia with concern etched deeply into his expression, his eyes searching hers for any trace of vulnerability, any flicker of the fear she might have once carried. But Nia remained astonishingly calm, too calm for someone who had just learned that the man who had betrayed her and the woman who had schemed against her were now facing consequences that would unravel their lives. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze piercing, and asked quietly, with a level of composure that startled even Damon, "What does that have to do with me?" Damon studied her intensely, realizing in that moment that Nia had transformed during the weeks she had been out of the world's reach. The fire that had sparked when she first awoke in the hospital had not diminished. It had hardened into something sharper, something lethal in its precision. Her voice, even in its quietness, carried authority. Her eyes burned with an intelligence and resolve that demanded respect. She was no longer the woman Caleb had known, no longer the one who had loved blindly, who had trusted the wrong man without hesitation. She was awake, and every fiber of her being had recalibrated toward survival, strength, and a subtle but undeniable reclaiming of power. Outside, Caleb's calls became a relentless storm of panic and confusion. He left frantic voicemails, each one more desperate than the last, his voice cracking with fear as he recounted that Victoria had vanished after receiving a threatening message. "You won't profit from another woman's pain." The irony of the words hung in the air, not lost on Nia. She exhaled softly, a gentle sound that masked the boiling satisfaction beneath her calm exterior. She did not need to act. The universe had begun to balance itself, and Caleb was already unraveling before her eyes. Karma had started its work without her intervention, and it was swift, brutal, and perfect. Nia leaned back slightly, allowing herself to breathe in the air of Damon's penthouse, a space that now felt like sanctuary and war room. All at once, Damon updated her gently on the outside world, careful to keep his voice calm while conveying the slow, inevitable collapse of Caleb's carefully curated life. Police had begun questioning him relentlessly. Victoria's parents were leveling blame squarely on his shoulders, and the company he had built on greed and manipulation saw stock values plummet overnight, as if the world itself was punishing him for the betrayal he had orchestrated. Damon's words were deliberate, ensuring that Nia understood the magnitude of the consequences unfolding, but he also made sure she felt safe, shielded from the chaos, while observing it from a place of strength. Nia only nodded, her heart detached, her mind assessing rather than reacting. She did not wish death upon anyone, though she understood that betrayal always carried consequences, that pain and loss were inevitable companions for those who had dealt it so recklessly. She allowed the weight of her own survival to anchor her, feeling the strength return to her body with each controlled breath. Her legs felt steadier, her back straighter, and her voice, when she spoke to Damon, carried a resonance that had been absent for months. A clarity, a power she had thought lost beneath illness and heartbreak. As the hours passed, Nia began to move through the penthouse with more confidence, testing the stability of her strength, savoring the fact that she could walk without trembling, stand without fear, and look into Damon's eyes with full awareness. Damon watched her closely, noting the subtle changes in her posture, the rising confidence in her steps, the growing power in her gaze. It was a quiet but profound metamorphosis. Every movement she made radiated recovery, authority, and an underlying sense of control over a world that had tried to crush her. Then, just as Nia allowed herself a small smile, a rare curve of lips that had not surfaced for weeks, the penthouse doorbell rang. The sound reverberated through the space, startling in its unexpectedness, carrying with it a weight of tension that immediately shifted the room. Damon's hand instinctively moved toward Nia's shoulder, a silent, protective gesture, but she raised a hand gently, signaling that she was fully capable of facing whatever waited on the other side. The doorbell echoed again, insistent, urgent, and Nia's heart did not flinch. Her gaze remained sharp, calculating, ready for whatever revelation awaited beyond the threshold. Minutes felt like hours as she approached the door, each step deliberate, her fingers brushing the smooth surface of the cold metal handle. The tension mounted, the anticipation thick as she turned the knob and pulled the door open. And there, standing outside in the soft evening light, was Caleb. His posture was broken, shoulders slumped in defeat, his polished arrogance completely stripped away. Tears streaked his face, his expression raw with desperation, vulnerability, and a fear he had never allowed himself to show. The man who had once believed he could manipulate every outcome, control every heart, and dominate every situation, now crumpled before her, with nothing left but raw regret. Nia's lips pressed together in a subtle line, a mixture of satisfaction and contemplation as she studied the broken figure before her. Damon remained quietly behind her, silent yet vigilant, his presence a shield that Caleb could not breach. The scene was almost cinematic, the powerful, broken man, the woman he had tried to destroy now standing composed, untouchable, and fully alive, and the other man, Damon, silently observing, ensuring no harm came to the woman he had always protected. The city lights behind Caleb glinted faintly, a mirror to the chaos and consequence now reflected in his desperate eyes. Caleb's voice cracked as he begged, pleading with the woman whose love he had once taken for granted. "Nia, please. I can't live without you. I'll change. I'll fix everything. I swear I... His words faltered, drowned in his own shame, his arrogance shattered. Every syllable was a reminder of the treachery he had committed, the lives he had tried to manipulate, and the irreversibility of his actions. Nia stood firm, her chest rising with calm authority, knowing fully that forgiveness was not hers to give, that power had shifted irreversibly, and as Caleb's desperate cries filled the air, the universe continued its quiet, relentless judgment. Victoria's disappearance, the loss of social standing, the collapse of company stock, and the relentless investigations, all of it coalesced into an invisible avalanche, cascading over the lives of the betrayers with unstoppable force. Nia's eyes narrowed slightly as she processed every detail, aware that while she did not need to act, her mere survival and presence were enough to amplify the consequences Caleb and Victoria now faced. The door remained open, Caleb crumpled in raw defeat outside, and Nia's gaze met Damon's, unwavering and resolute, as if silently declaring to the universe and to those who had tried to betray her, "This is only the beginning, and the woman who once lay helpless is now fully awake, fully aware, and fully in control of her destiny." 8. The air outside Damon's penthouse crackled with tension, as Nia's hand lingered on the doorknob for a fraction of a second longer than expected, her pulse steady, but her mind alight with calculation. The city lights reflected off her eyes, a mirror to the fire that had been slowly building inside her since she first awoke, since she first saw betrayal with naked clarity. Caleb, crumpled on the doorstep, seemed almost unreal against the sharp edges of her composed figure. The desperate man who had once wielded control with arrogance and entitlement now lay broken, his tears streaking down a face that no longer held power over her. Nia's gaze swept over him, slow, measured, yet unwavering. Every muscle in her body exuded the quiet strength she had reclaimed over the past weeks, the strength forged in betrayal, nurtured in survival, and sharpened in the clarity of her awakening. Caleb's voice cracked through the air, trembling with raw anguish. "Please, forgive me. I can't live without you, Nia. I'll do anything. I'll change. I swear I'll—" He reached out instinctively, his hands shaking, eyes pleading, as if mere proximity could undo the years of greed, manipulation, and betrayal that had defined their marriage. But Nia did not flinch, did not recoil, did not offer even a shadow of the love he had once demanded as her right. Instead, she looked down at him with a calm so complete it made the air itself seem still. Her expression held no anger, no bitterness, no softness, only truth. The truth that could not be manipulated, could not be bought, could not be swayed by any combination of words or tears. "You already planned my funeral," she said quietly, her voice low, precise, carrying the weight of every hour she had spent, trapped in vulnerability, every second she had endured betrayal, and every moment she had survived despite his wishes. The words were simple, yet they cut deeper than any scream or accusation. Caleb's body stiffened, and he clutched at her ankles as though trying to anchor himself to her physically in a vain attempt to regain the control he had lost emotionally. The world seemed to tilt for a heartbeat, Caleb's desperation a tangible thing, vibrating against Nia's calm. Damon, silent until now, stepped behind her, a protective shadow, his hand ready to intercept any sudden movement, any potential threat. But Nia raised a single hand gently, an unspoken signal that she did not need saving now. The moment belonged to her, entirely and completely. Caleb's confession spilled out in halting, tremulous words, each phrase carrying the weight of his desperation, his greed, the manipulations, the lies, the affair with Victoria, the cold calculation that had once made him feel untouchable. His voice quavered, sometimes breaking entirely, but Nia did not flinch. She did not respond with anger, did not retort, did not cry. She simply absorbed every syllable with quiet strength. Her heart, though wounded, had been tempered by survival and clarity. It had emerged resilient, unyielding, and luminous. The betrayal that had once crushed her now fueled her composure, each word Caleb spoke reinforcing the magnitude of the justice already unfolding in the universe around him. "I loved you," she whispered finally, each word measured and deliberate, dripping with the weight of years and the pain of misplaced trust. "You chose to kill that love." Her declaration hung in the air, sharp and final, striking Caleb like a physical blow. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the intensity of her presence. There was no pleading in her tone, no hesitation, no trace of weakness. She had witnessed betrayal, endured the near loss of life, survived manipulation, and emerged stronger, sharper, unshakable. Her past love was not erased, but it had transformed, crystallized into wisdom, into resolve, into an indomitable power that required no validation from the man who had tried to destroy her. Without another word, Nia lifted her bag with precise, unhurried motion. She stepped around Caleb, each footfall deliberate, measured, echoing softly against the marble floors like a drumbeat of awakening. Caleb, unable to comprehend the finality of her composure, collapsed further into the pavement, clutching himself in utter despair, his hands reaching toward her as if the world could be held together by mere proximity to her presence. His pleas intensified, frantic, desperate. But Nia's steps continued, deliberate and dignified, each one a declaration of power reclaimed. Damon walked silently beside her, a quiet sentinel. But he did not touch her, did not guide her, did not claim victory for himself. This moment belonged to her alone. This triumph, this rebirth, was entirely and exclusively Nia's. As Nia passed through the penthouse threshold into the sunlight, the warmth struck her with more than physical sensation. It carried symbolism, a rebirth into autonomy and clarity. She inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs, fill her with purpose, with life, with the undeniable knowledge that she had survived and emerged, not diminished but exponentially stronger. The sunlight glinted off her skin, her long hair flowing with a subtle breeze, and every movement, every step radiated confidence and power. She did not glance back, she did not pause, she did not allow herself even a flicker of regret. The past had been conquered, and she had no need to revisit it. The world around her seemed to hold its breath as she moved forward. People she passed in the street sensed her aura, strength, resilience, independence. Without needing explanation, Nia's rise was visible, magnetic, undeniable. Her presence radiated authority, grace, and self-possession, as if the universe itself were acknowledging her ascent. She did not run to another man. She did not seek revenge or validation. She did not yield to the impulses of anger or retaliation. Every step she took, every gesture she made, was a declaration. She had survived, she had risen, she was her own legend now. Caleb's cries echoed faintly behind her, a distant remnant of the man who had believed himself invincible. Victoria's absence, the collapse of Caleb's empire, the crumbling of every carefully constructed lie, all were echoes in the distance as Nia's figure moved further into the city, untouchable, untethered, unstoppable. Damon followed silently, respectful, watching her ascend into a future she had fully reclaimed. This was not about a man or a betrayal. This was about the reclamation of a life, a soul, and the fierce dignity of a woman who had been underestimated, who had been betrayed, and who had emerged entirely whole and radiant. The sunlight danced along the streets as Nia continued, each step a pulse of vitality, a heartbeat of renewal. The city itself seemed to recognize her transformation. Whispers of admiration, awe, and speculation trailed in her wake, subtle yet persistent. She had become more than a woman who had survived. She had become an emblem, a presence that demanded acknowledgement, a living testament to resilience and unyielding spirit. Her rise was deliberate in its pacing, in its grace, and in its undeniable impact. Every observer, every passerby, sensed it intuitively. The power of a woman who had faced death, betrayal, and heartbreak, and had emerged victorious in every possible sense. Nia disappeared into the expanse of the city, sunlight glinting off her hair, every movement radiating power, autonomy and dignity, and as the world watched, it whispered her name like a legend. A woman who had been betrayed, threatened and underestimated, yet had risen, unstoppable, indomitable, and entirely herself. She was alive. She was free. She was rising. And that's the end of today's story on Beyond Color Stories. What did you think of Nia's journey, her strength, her courage, and the way she rose above betrayal? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another tale full of suspense, drama, and emotion. Thank you for watching, and remember, every ending is just the beginning of a new story. See you in the next one.